long before the pyramids touched the skies. Before kings ruled and nations rose, there was only the fight to survive. From the spark of the first fire to the rise of machines, this is our story, a journey through war and wonder, brilliance and blood, across 200,000 years of human grit and greatness. This is the story of human civilization.
Local religion, local names, and possibly new local customs.
Everything we know about the Indian civilization so far.
Egypt is probably the most fertile place on earth.
Stretching from
Prehistory human origins. Humans evolved in Africa from great apes through the lineage of hominins which are 7 to 5 million years ago. The ability to walk on two legs emerged in early hominins after the split from chimpanzees as an adaptation possibly associated with a shift from forest to savanna habitats. Hominins began to use rudimentary stone tools approximately 3.3 million years ago, marking the advent of the Paleolithic era. This is where the human story begins, deep in the heart of Africa.
And we originate very recently in Africa.
Because it is here that humankind originated.
Is possibly the birthplace of mankind.
Around 300,000 years ago, a new species emerged, Homo sapiens. They were born from earlier ancestors, part of a long evolutionary path that stretched back millions of years. At first, they were simply survivors, but over time, something remarkable began to unfold. By 100,000 years ago, these early humans were more than just hunters, they were creators. They began adorning themselves with beads and rare ochre, symbols of identity, perhaps even early signs of beauty and rituals. By 50,000 years ago, they had learned to bury their dead, build tools that could be thrown from afar and sail across open waters, a sign of bold exploration. And then came a transformation that changed everything, the development of language.
language is probably the hardest problem in science.
What is the oldest language in the world?
In alphabetic script.
When did language first emerge?
Not just sounds but structures and technical language. It unlocked their minds and opened the door to culture, memory, and shared ideas. And with it came art. In the glow of firelight, they painted walls with animal spirits, carved delicate figures from bone and ivory. From the caves of Europe to the jungles of Africa, humans began telling stories. Not with words, but with color, shape, and rhythm. Their world was no longer just survival, it was spiritual, it was symbolic. They were the first to walk the long road of civilization, and this was only the beginning. Now let's learn about the migration of early humans. The migration of anatomically modern humans out of Africa took place in multiple waves, beginning around 194 to 177,000 years ago. The dominant view among scholars is that the early waves of migration died out and all modern non-Africans are descended from a single group that left Africa 70 to 50,000 years ago. Homo sapiens proceeded to colonize all the continents and larger islands, arriving in Australia 65,000 years ago, in Europe 45,000 years ago, and in America 21,000 years ago. These migrations occurred during the most recent ice age, when many temperate regions of today were inhospitable. Nevertheless, by the end of the ice age, about 12,000 years ago, humans had colonized nearly all the ice-free parts of the globe. Human expansion coincided with both Quaternary extinction event and Neanderthal extinction events. These extinctions were probably caused by climate change, human activity, or a combination of the two. The Bronze Age saw the development of cities and civilization.
Of civilization.
A brief history of Western civilization.
Building these fortresses and said, this is Egypt.
Consolidation of the power of the pharaoh.
Early civilization arose close to rivers, first in Mesopotamia with Tigris and Euphrates, followed by the Egyptian civilization along the Nile River, the North Hittite civilization in coastal Peru, the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan and northwestern India, and the Chinese civilization along the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. These societies developed a number of shared characteristics, including a central government, a complex economy, a social structure, and system for keeping records. These cultures variously invented the wheel, mathematics, bronze working, sailing boats, the potter's wheel, woven cloth, construction of monumental buildings, and writings. Writing facilitated the administration of cities, the expression of ideas, and the preservation of information. It may have independently developed in at least 4 ancient civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and lowland Mesoamerica. The earliest system of writing was Mesopotamian cuneiform script, which began as a system of pictographs whose pictorial representation became more simplified and abstract. Transport was facilitated by waterways, including rivers and seas, which fostered the projection of military power and the exchange of goods, ideas, and inventions. The Bronze Age also saw new land technologies such as horse-based cavalries and chariots that allowed armies to move faster. The growth of cities was often followed by the establishment of states and empires. In Egypt, the initial division between Upper and Lower Egypt was followed by the unification of Wall Valley around 3100 BC. Around 2600 BC, the Indus Valley civilization built major cities at Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Mesopotamian history was characterized by frequent wars between city-states, leading to different hegemony from one city to another. In Crete, the Bronze civilization emerged by 2000 BC and is regarded as the first civilization in Europe. From 800 to 200 BC, the Axolotls saw the emergence of transformative philosophical and religious ideas that developed in many different places, mostly independently of each other. Chinese Confucianism, Indian Buddhism and Jainism, and Jewish monotheism all arose during this period. Persian Zoroastrianism began earlier, perhaps around 100,000 BC, but was institutionalized by Achaemenid Empire during the Exile Age. New philosophies took hold in Greece during the 5th century BC, optimized by thinkers such as Plato and Aristotle. The first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC, marking the period known as Classical Antiquity. In 508 BC, the world's first democratic system of government was established in Athens. Axolotl ideas shaped subsequent intellectual and religious history. Confucianism was one of the 3 schools of thought that came to dominate Chinese thinking, along with Taoism and legalism. Buddhism became the main religion of South, Southeast, and East Asia. The Greek philosophical tradition diffused throughout the Mediterranean world and as far as India, starting in the 4th century BC after the conquest of Alexander the Great of Macedon. Regional empires. The millennium from 500 BC to 500 CE saw a series of empires of unprecedented size develop. Well-trained professional armies, unifying ideologies, and advanced bureaucracies created the possibilities for emperors to rule over large domains, whose population could attain numbers upwards of tens of millions of subjects. Two major empires began in modern-day Greece. In the late 5th century BC, several Greek city-states checked the Achaemenid Persian advance in Europe through the Greco-Persian Wars. These wars were followed by the Golden Age of Athens, the seminal period of ancient Greece that laid the foundation of many of the Western civilization, including the first theatrical performance. The wars led to the creation of Delian League and eventually the Athenian Empire, which was defeated by a Spartan-led coalition during the Peloponnesian War. Philip of Macedon unified the Greek city-states into the Hellenic League, and his son Alexander the Great founded an empire extending from present-day Greece to India. In Europe, the Roman Republic was founded in the 6th century BC and began expanding its territory in the 3rd century BC. Prior to this, the Carthaginian Empire had dominated the Mediterranean world, however lost 3 successive wars to the Romans. The Republic became an empire, and by the time of Augustus, it had established its dominion over most of the Mediterranean world. The empire continued to grow and reached its peak under Trajan, controlling much of the land from England to Mesopotamia. Christianity was legalized by Constantine I in 313 BC. After 3 centuries of imperial persecution, it became the sole official religion of the empire. And in South Asia, Chandragupta Maurya founded the Maurya Empire, which flourished under Ashoka the Great. From 4th to 6th century BC, the Gupta Empire oversaw the period referred to as the ancient India's golden age. In China, Qin Shi Huang put an end to the courting warring states period by uniting all of China under the Qin dynasty. Qin Shi Huang was an adherent of the legalist school of thought, and he displaced the hereditary aristocracy by creating an efficient system of administration, staffed by officials appointed according to merit. The harshness of the Qin dynasty led to rebellions and dynasty's fall. It was followed by the Han dynasty, which combined the legalist school of thought with Confucian ideals. The Han invented compass, one of China's four great inventions. Successful regional empires were also established in Americas, arising from culture established early as 2500 BC. In Mesoamerica, vast pre-Columbian societies were built, the most notable being the Zapotec civilization and the Maya civilization, which reached its highest states of development during the Mesoamerican Classic period. The Greek Maya city-states slowly rose in numbers and prominence, and Maya culture spread throughout the Yucatan and surrounding areas. The Maya developed a writing system and used the concept of zero in their mathematics. Technology developed sporadically in the ancient world. There were periods of rapid technological progress, such as Greco-Roman era in the Mediterranean region. The Greek science, technology, and mathematics are generally considered to have reached their peak during the Hellenistic period, typified by devices such as Antikythera mechanism. Two of the most important innovations were paper in China and straw in India, both of which diffused widely throughout the world. The Chinese learned to make silk and build massive enduring projects such as Great Wall of China and the Grand Canal. The Romans were also accomplished builders, inventing concrete, perfecting the use of arches, and creating aqueducts to transport water over long distances to urban centers. Most ancient societies practiced slavery, which was particularly prevalent in Athens and Rome, where slaves made a large proportion of the population and were foundational to the economy. Patriarchy was also common, with men controlling more political and economic power than women. Decline, fall, and resurgence. The ancient empire faced common problems associated with maintaining huge armies and supporting essential bureaucracies. In Rome and Han China, the state began to decline, and the barbarian pressure on the frontiers hastened the internal dissolution. The Han dynasty fell into civil war in 220 CE, beginning the Three Kingdoms period. And in the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire split into western and eastern regions with usually separate emperors. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE to German influence under Odoacer in the migration period of the Germanic people, but the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, was more long-lasting.
They're here.
It is only one man.
No, they're here.
Post-classical history, dated roughly from 500 to 1500 CE, was characterized by rise and spread of major religions. From the 10th, 13th centuries, the medieval warm period in the Northern Hemisphere aided agriculture and led to population growth in the parts of Europe and Asia. It was followed by the Little Ice Age, along with the plagues of the 14th century, put downward pressure on the population of Eurasia. Major inventions of the period were gunpowder, guns, and printing, all of which originated in China. The post-classical period encompasses the early Muslim conquests, followed by the Mongol invasions and founding of the Ottoman Empire. Greater Middle East. Before the advent of Islam in the 7th century, the Middle East was dominated by the Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian empires, which frequently fought each other for control of the several disputed regions. This was also a cultural battle, with the Byzantine Christian culture competing against the Persian Zoroastrian traditions. The birth of Islam created a new contender that quickly surpassed both of these empires. Prophet Muhammad, the last prophet of Islam, initiated the early Muslim conquest in the 7th century, he established a new unified polity in Arabia that expanded its territories under the Rashidun Caliphate and the Umayyad Caliphate, culminating in the establishment of Muslim rule on 3 continents, Asia, Africa and Europe. By 750 CE, the subsequent Abbasid Caliphate oversaw the Islamic Golden Age, an era of learning, science and invention. During this, philosophy, art and literature flourished. Scholars preserved and synthesized knowledge of ancient Greece and Persia, the manufacture of paper from China, and the decimal positional numbering system from India. At the same time, they made significant original contributions in various fields, such as Al-Khwarizmi's development of algebra and Avicenna's comprehensive philosophical system. Islamic civilization expanded both by conquest and based on its merchant economy. Merchants brought goods and their Islamic faith to China, India, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Arab domination of the Middle East ended in the mid of the 11th century with the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, migrating south from the Turkic homelands. The Seljuks were challenged by Europe during the Crusades, a series of religious wars aimed at rolling back Muslim territories and regaining control of the Holy Land. The Crusades were ultimately unsuccessful and served more to weaken the Byzantine Empire, especially with the sack of Constantinople in the 1204. In the late 13th century, a new wave of invaders, the Mongols, swept through the regions but were eventually eclipsed by the Turks and founding of the Ottoman Empire in modern-day Turkey around 1299. From the 10th century, the Abbasid Caliphate African territories was consumed by the Fatimid Caliphate, who was supplanted by Ayyubids in the 12th century and then later by Mamluks in the 13th century. In the Maghreb and Western Sahara, the Almoravids dominated from the 11th century until it was subsumed by the Almohads Caliphate in the 12th century. The Almohads collapse gave rise to Marinids in Morocco, the Zayyanids in Algeria, and the Hafsids in Tunisia. From the 9th to 13th centuries, Central Asia was divided among several powerful states, including some Seljuks and Khwarezmian Empire. These states were succeeded by the Mongols in the 13th century. In 1370, Timur, a Turkic military leader in the Mongol traditions, conquered most of the regions and founded the Timurid Empire. Timur's large empire collapsed soon after his death, but his descendant retained control of the core areas of Central Asia and Iran. They oversaw the Timurid renaissance of art and architecture. Europe. Since at least the 4th century, Christianity has played a prominent role in shaping culture, values, and institutions of Western civilization, primarily through Catholicism and later also Protestantism. Europe during the early Middle Ages was characterized by depopulation, deurbanization, and barbarian invasions, all of which began in late antiquity. The barbarian invaders formed their own new kingdoms in the remains of the Western Roman Empire. Christianity expanded in Western Europe and monasteries were founded. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Franks under the Carolingian dynasty established an empire covering much of the Western Europe. It lasted until the 9th century when it succumbed to pressure from new invaders, the Vikings, Magyars, and Arabs. In 980, Vladimir the Great adopted Orthodox Christianity as the state religion. During the High Middle Ages, which began after 1000, the population of Europe increased as technological and agricultural innovations allowed trade to flourish and crop yields to increase. The establishment of feudal system affected the structure of the medieval society. It included vassalage, a political structure whereby knights and lower status nobles owed military service to their overlords in return for the right to rent from lands and manors. In 1004, the Great Schism between the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches led to the prominent cultural differences between the Western and Eastern Europe. The Crusades were a series of religious wars waged by Christians to wrest control of the Holy Land from Muslims and succeeded for long enough to establish some crusader states in the Levant. Mongols reached Europe in 1236 and conquered Kiev and Russia. Along with badly invading Poland and Hungary, Lithuania cooperated with Mongols and remained independent, and in 14th century formed a personal union with Poland. The late Middle Ages marked by difficulties, calamities, plague and wars devastated the population of Western Europe, and Black Death alone killed approximately 75 to 200 million people between 1347 and 1350. It was one of the most deadly pandemics in human history. After the fall of the Gupta Empire in 515, North India was divided into complex and fluid network of smaller kingdoms. Early Muslim incursions began in the northwest in 711 CE when Arab Umayyad Caliphate conquered much of the present-day Pakistan. The Arab military advance was halted at that point, but Islam is still spread in India, largely due to the influence of Arab merchants along the western coast. Post-classical dynasties in South India included those of the Chalukyas, Hoysalas, and Cholas. Literature, architecture, sculpture, and paintings flourished under the patronage of these kings. Some of the other important states that emerged in South India during this time included the Bahmani Sultanate and Vijayanagara Empire. In 589, the Sui dynasty unified China. Soon after, the Tang dynasty rose, bringing a golden age of prosperity, poetry, and the famous civil service exam. But after Tang declined, the Song dynasty unified order only to lose north. By 1279, the Mongols had conquered all of China, ruling as the Yuan dynasty until the Ming restored Chinese rule in 1368. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Yamato period laid the foundation of centralized power. The Nara and Heian era saw Buddhism, Chinese culture, and masterpieces like Tale of Genji. From 1185, real power shifted to samurai and shogunates, while emperors became symbolic. The early modern period is the era that followed the Middle Ages, stretching from the late 15th century to around 1800, a time of major turning points: the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans, the spread of printing press, and Europe bold voyages of discovery across the Atlantic and along Africa's coast. Warfare also transformed during this time. Gunpowder weapons, larger armies, and powerful navies reshaped the way of battle were fought. At the same time, stronger centralized states began to rise, while early forms of capitalism started to take roots. This was also the age of global empires. Portugal and Spain were the pioneers, building maritime empire in Africa, Americas, and Asia. Soon after, the French, English, and Dutch followed, competing for colonies and trade. Mercantilism dominated with policies designed to enrich the mother countries, often at the expense of their own colonies. Trading posts sprang up across continents, and by the 1600s, powerful chartered companies emerged, like the English East India Company in 1600 and Dutch East India Company in 1602, often called first true multinational corporations. Meanwhile, in Europe itself, the serfdom slowly declined and eventually vanished in many regions, while the influence of the Catholic Church weakened. Perhaps the most defining feature of this age was the Age of Discovery. In 1492, Columbus' voyages to Americas connected the old world with new. What followed was the Columbian exchange, of massive transfer of crops, animals, diseases, peoples, and culture between two hemispheres. The early modern period was in the every sense of the beginning of our interconnected world, the age of exploration, empire, and transformation. In 1453, the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire and rising as the dominant power in the Middle East. By the 16th century, they had expanded across North Africa, leaving only Morocco independent under the Shadi and later the Alawi dynasties. Persians, meanwhile, came under the Safavids in 1501. They made Shia Islam as the state religion, setting Persia apart from its Sunni neighbors. Alongside the Mughals in India, both the Ottomans and Safavids became known as the Great Gunpowder Empires thanks to their mastery of firearms. In Central Asia, the Uzbek replaced Timurids. In Europe, the same period was one of the immense intellectual and cultural ferment. The Renaissance, beginning in Italy, revived the classical knowledge and gave the world timeless works. Petrarch's poetry, Boccaccio's Decameron, the art of Leonardo da Vinci, and the Northern Renaissance genius Albrecht Dürer. After the Renaissance came the Reformation. Martin Luther's protest in Germany shattered the Catholic unity and gave the birth to Protestant Christianity. The Renaissance spirit of curiosity also fueled humanism, the scientific revolution, and eventually the Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant applied reasons to society, politics, and human nature itself. With Gutenberg's invention of printing press in 1440, these revolutionary ideas spread faster than ever before.
In a world before pixels and screens, words were given life by the steady hand and the mighty press.
Politically, Europe witnessed the rise of strong centralized states. Absolute monarchs in France, Russia, the Habsburg Empire, and Prussia built powerful bureaucracies and armies. In Russia, Yuan the Terrible crowned Tsar in 1547. Across Western Europe, nations clashed constantly in war driven by competition and empire. Among the most defining war was the 30-Year War, the 7 Years' War, and later the French Revolutionary Wars. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted, toppling monarchy and paving the way for modern democracy. Out of its chaos rose Napoleon Bonaparte. His Napoleonic War in the early 19th century reshaped the Euro once again. In the Indian subcontinent, the Mughal Empire, founded by Babur in 1526 and ruled for about 2 centuries. Starting from the northwest, the Mughals brought most of India under their control by the late 17th century, except for the far south. To resist them, the Maratha Empire was established by Shivaji in 1674 on western coast. Over time, the Maratha gained power and territory through a series of Mughal-Maratha wars. Around the same period, Sikhism emerged in the late 15th century through the teachings of 10 gurus. And in 1799, Maharaja Ranjit Singh founded the Sikh Empire in Punjab. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, European power colonized the Americas, wiping out native civilization like Aztecs and Incas. Diseases brought by Europeans kill up to 90% of the native population, and in some cases, colonial power even committed acts of genocide. Spain, Portugal, Britain and France claimed vast territories, establishing colonies and importing millions of African slaves. Spain dominated most of South America, while Portugal took Brazil. Britain colonized North America's east coast, France settled the central regions, and Russia established colonies in Alaska and California. After the 7 Years' War, France lost most of its North American lands to Britain and Spain. Britain's 13 colonies later declared independence in 1776, forming the United States after the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Around the same time, African slaves in the French colony Saint Domingo rebelled successfully, leading to Haiti's independence, while France sold its Louisiana territory to the US in 1803. The long 19th century, a period that began with the thunder of a revolution in France in 1789 and ended with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. It was an age of transformation, an era when the Industrial Revolution reshaped the world more profoundly than anything since the dawn of the agriculture itself. The Industrial Revolution first took root in Great Britain around 1770. Factories rose, machines replaced hands, and mass production began to dominate the world of labor. Goods that once took days to craft were now made in hours, faster, cheaper, and in overwhelming quantities. Industrial Revolution lifted living standards, but it also tore society apart. Workers, factory owners clashed bitterly over wages, hours, and human dignity. Smoke filled the skies, but beneath that haze, a new global order was forming. With industries came globalization, the growing interconnection of economies, politics, and culture. Railroads, steamships, and telegraph stitched the world together like never before. As Europe industrialized, its empire expanded. By the 1820s, Latin America had thrown off colonial change, winning its independence through revolutions and wars.
My name is George Washington.
By the late 19th century, a new imperial fever swept Europe. Fueled by the power of the Second Industrial Revolution, the European nations raced to carve off Africa. By the dawn of the 20th century, almost the entire continent was under the foreign rule, save for Ethiopia and Liberia. This so-called scramble for Africa brought untold suffering, from the atrocities in the Congo Free State to Herero and Nama genocide. Inside Europe itself, a new force was rising: nationalism.
Too long have we suffered under their yoke, but no more! Freedom is our birthright, and we will take it!
As industrial and military rivalries deepened, people across the continents began to see themselves as the member of the unique nations, demanding unity, power, and independence. Between 1828 and 1926, democracy began to take roots.
We will not be silenced! We demand freedom! We demand the vote! And we demand bread for all!
33 nations adopted democratic institutions, a wave of hope that promised freedom though often fragile and fleeting. The 19th century also saw fall of ancient injustices. Slavery and serfdom were abolished across much of the world, and new voices rose for equality. Women fought for the right to vote, to studies, and the work beyond the domestic walls.
We demand the right to vote. We demand education. Votes for women.
By the dawn of the 20th century, that struggle had begun to bear fruit. Meanwhile, the East was awakening. In Japan, the Meiji Restoration transformed a feudal society into a modern industrial empire. In the Ottoman world, the Tanzimat reform tried to revive the empire, but decline continued. In China, the self-strengthening movement achieved progress, but the Tapping Rebellion, history's bloody civil war, left tens of millions dead.
Soldiers of the righteous army, the time has come. Raise your banners high and prepare for glory.
By the end of the century, the balance of power has shifted. The United States had become the world's largest economy. A new wave of inventions, electricity, the internal combustion engine, and the assembly line launched humanity into the second industrial revolution. Technology did not just change work, it changed art itself. Photography, recorded sound, and film gave words entirely new waves to express its soul. But with progress came destruction. Industrial pollution grew unchecked, choking cities and landscapes alike. Human ambition learned to harness the skies, first with balloons and by 1903 with the Wright brothers' first power flight. As the 20th century dawned, Europe stood proud. The richest, most powerful civilization in history. Its empire stretched across the world, and its influence reached from London to Tokyo and from Paris to New York. Humanity marched into the 20th century believing it had conquered destiny itself. Empires stretch across continents, factories roar with mechanical pride, science whisper promises of mastery over nature, and rulers proclaim that progress was irreversible, that mankind was rising toward a golden age. Yet beneath this glittering confidence, the world was unknowingly preparing to set itself on fire. In 1914, a spark in Europe ignited a storm unlike anything witnessed before. The First World War, a global conflict that dragged nations from every corner of the earth into the vortex of destruction.
Just punch the. Let him hear that word. Just let him hear that word.
The Allies, France, Russia, and Britain confronted the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Trenches carved scars across Europe, where young men suffocated in mud, steel, and smoke. Machine guns shared the old romance of cavalry and honor. Poison gas drifted death incarnate and utterly thunder day and night. Somewhere between 10 and 20 million souls were consumed, and while the wars and four ancient empires crumbled into silence, the Austro-Hungarian, German, Ottoman, and Russian realms collapsing under the weight of modernity and madness. But the devastation did not end with a ceasefire. In the dying breath of the Ottoman Empire, the Armenian, Assyrian, and Greek people suffer systematic annihilation. Entire communities uprooted, marched to desert, erased from memory in one of the history's darkest crimes. Then nature struck where humanity had already blood enough. The Spanish flu swept across a shattered world. From 1918 to 1920, killing at least 25 million people, turning cities into graveyards and homes into mourning halls. After this, hope tried to rise from ruins. The League of Nations was formed to safeguard peace. Yet human ambition is not so easily tamed. A revolution in Russia birthed the first communist state, a new ideology promising equality, justice, and workers' rule. Fascism rose in Italy under Mussolini, and in the ashes of the German defeat, Adolf Hitler constructed an empire of hatred, reviving militarism and racial tyranny. The world sailed once again toward catastrophe as the Great Depression deepened bonds, fueling nationalism, desperation, and vengeance. Then history roared again. Second World War erupted, a conflict where nearly every nation was swallowed by carnage. Hitler's army blitz across Europe, Japan marched through Asia with ruthless ambition, Italy sought imperial revival. But the Allies, United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and China resisted the tide. And in this war, the Holocaust revealed the darkest abyss of human cruelty, as 6 million Jews and millions of others were exterminated in systematic genocide. In the Pacific, Japan wrought devastation across China, and cities burned from Shanghai to Nanjing. When the war neared its end, humanity unleashed unimaginable atomic fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In a heartbeat, cities vanished. The world had entered in the nuclear age, where the power to end civilization rested in human hands. The total death toll between 55 and 80 million marked the deadliest chapter ever written. From this abyss rose a fragile hope. The United Nations was created, determined to safeguard human dignity. In the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights gave voice to freedom long denied. Europe, once a battlefield of empires, began binding itself into a union that would one day become the European Union. Yet peace was again fragile. Communism spread into Eastern Europe, China, Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba. The United States sought to contain it, forming alliances like NATO, while the Soviet Union created the Warsaw Pact. After this, the Cold War began, a silent duel of ideology and power, fought in shadows, waged by spies, propaganda, proxy war, and nuclear arsenals capable of ending humanity in minutes. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the edge of annihilation, a single breath away from turning Earth into ashes. Ultimately, Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, defeated not by bombs, but by economic decay and pressure of a free world. Yet the Cold War's urgency drove miracles. Jet engines conquered the skies, rockets pierced the atmosphere, satellites circled Earth, computers evolved from room-sized machines into tools that would soon sit in every hand. Humanity walked on the moon, DNA revealed the secrets of life, agriculture, green revolution fed billions, plate tectonic reshape our understanding of Earth itself. The internet rose, and with it a new era of communication that dissolved border and rewrote society. As science surged, population multiplied from 1.6 billion in 1900 to more than 6 billion by century's end. Even as poverty fell from engulfing nearly all of humanity to only a fraction, life expectancy doubled, medicine extinguished smallpox, education spread to nearly every child on earth, but progress was uneven. Africa struggled under post-colonial burden, the Congo War echoing global tragedy, the Middle East under decades of turbulence, revolution, invasions, and unresolved struggle of Palestine and Israel. Latin America wrestled with inequality and foreign interference. China, after the tragedy of the Great Leap Forward and the death of millions in famine, shifted course toward economic reform, raising to become a global power and rapidly urbanizing into cities like Shanghai, symbols of 21st century ambition. In the early 2000s, economic globalization stitched nations together, only to reveal vulnerability during the Great Recession. Technology accelerated faster than imagination. Smartphones, social media reshaped identity and politics. Artificial intelligence advanced, performing tasks once reserved for humans. Religions declined in parts of the West, while fundamentalist currents rose elsewhere. And then in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe. Halting economies, closing borders, and remaining humanity that accept all progress, it remained fragile. Now mankind stands at a precipice capable of curing diseases, colonizing planets, and unlocking the code of life, yet equally capable of ruining its climate, widening inequality, and building weapons that can silence civilizations. Our species had conquered oceans, skies, continents, and even the void of space. We have risen from caves to cities of steel, from tribal whispers to global networks, from fire to nuclear power, and from machines that think. And yet the oldest question endures like an echo across centuries. And all our power, can humanity learn to master not the world but itself?